Hey everybody, today I am going to be talking about my top favorite movies of 2017. I know I'm so late on this, but you know, better this than nothing at all. I don't see very many current movies, and I'm sure a lot of you probably picked up on that. So there are a lot of movies that I have yet to see, but of the movies that I did see, these are my favorites. I'm going to do top 5, and I'm going to go in alphabetical order. At least I think they're in alphabetical order. Anyway, but I'm going to save my favorite movie because there is one that is clearly my favorite of all of them, and I'm going to save that for last. But anyway, we'll just start with number 1. This is The Florida Project, which is directed by Sean Baker. I just loved this movie. I loved the freshness of it. I loved the vibrance, the very serendipitous quality of it. It's very reminiscent of movies like French New Wave films and even a little bit of Italian neorealism. It's like you're watching something very incidental and very unique. We see this really colorful world through the innocence, through the eyes of children, and yet that is juxtaposed by the more harsh realities that their parents are living in. So we see kind of the difference between the children and the adults, the idea of the fantasy and reality. This isn't a movie that is just about being a child and those special moments that you can really only live once, but it's also about growing older, and the inevitability of that is quite heartbreaking. When I left the film, I had kind of an interesting reaction to it. I felt like it was able to capture the essence of these people while also making kind of a greater point about the lower class in general in America, and the idea, the obsession with the American dream, hence Disneyland, because you know that's brought into the film quite a lot. The idea of the American dream, consumerism, and the idea that these fantasies that we crave are ultimately completely untrue. They are just fantasies, yet that's all we know how to dream about and escape to. So the people will kind of lie to themselves in a way to feel better. Just that idea and the way that they captured it in the end, to me, it was very, it had a darkness to it. It's something that was slightly unsettling, even when the rest of the film is so fresh and spontaneous and beautiful to look at. But I loved that contradiction, and it really is a great film, and you've got to see it if you haven't. Next on the list is Lady Bird, and this is written and directed by Greta Gerwig, and I think that Gerwig has done something really, really special here with her first kind of writer-director endeavor. She's created a film that is very reminiscent of a lot of the writers of the past, the writers of the 20th century, I think, are people that Gerwig was very inspired by, and I as well was very inspired by them. People like Joan Didion and Frank O'Hara. Not a moment is wasted in this film. Every single line is so witty and so layered. The characters are also interesting, and it feels like a very sensory experience. It feels like a scrapbook of little moments of a young woman slowly becoming, or I should say, yeah, a young lady becoming a woman, kind of having that final moment, you know, from adolescence to actually becoming a woman and going off to college. But at its heart, this is a mother-daughter relationship, and that part of the film is so rich and so palpable and wistful at the same time, because what's important, and I think something that Gerwig is doing, is she's really looking at the bittersweetness of that, the idea that you don't realize how important your mother is, or the moments in your life, until after you're gone, after you've left and you're coming back and realizing all the things that you had. There's a bittersweetness to that idea, and yet at the same time there's kind of a beauty in the idea of realizing that things are important to you that you didn't realize in the past. It is a near perfect film, and it's kind of captured the hearts of a lot of people, so definitely worth your time. Next, I'm going to talk about The Lost City of Z, or Zed. This is written and directed by James Gray. I love James Gray. I think some of the things that he's done lately, a few years ago he did a film called The Immigrant. If you haven't seen that, watch it. I loved that movie, and I don't know if I like this one as much, but it is right up there in terms of just Gray has an ability. He understands kind of classical storytelling better than a lot of his contemporaries. He makes them just so much more mature and more complex and less conscious, which I really appreciate. And with this film in particular, this film seems to be much more in the style of like David Lean epics from the old days. So like the films of Lawrence of Arabia. That's one that I was constantly thinking about, and also Bridge on the River Kwai. Gray is not the kind of person who is constantly drawing attention to that nostalgia. Instead, it's just interwoven into the story. And ultimately, this is a film that is about the creative process. It's about the sacrifices that one makes in order to achieve their dreams, even when it means that you have to isolate yourself further. And there's quite an existential quality to the film as well. It's ultimately about the idea that what we often want is unattainable, unfortunately, and we often all meet our end before we actually discover any real answers to life or whatever it is that we're looking for. I think the film is absolutely exquisite. I've seen it twice and I liked it even more the second time. There really isn't anything in it that is superfluous, no bullshit, it's focused, and it's great. Next, I'm gonna talk about Raw. This was directed by Julia Ducournau. I think that's how you pronounce her name. I really don't know, but she is fantastic. I cannot believe that this is her first feature-length film because she is fearless. She's confident and so settled in her point of view, almost like an auteur veteran. She's ballsy and she's relentless, and she's using the body horror genre to write a coming-of-age story about a young girl becoming a woman, kind of like Lady Bird, but very, very, very different at the same time. This is a great feminist cannibal horror film, which I know sounds really, really strange, but it really is. It depicts women in a way, or in horror films in a way that we rarely see. You know, we've got a female protagonist right at the center, and you know, her sister as well, and they're just interesting characters because they're fully fleshed out, they're fully dimensional. They get angry and they're brutal, they're crude, and they're lustful, they're awkward, and just, yeah, fully dimensional. You'd think that'd be an obvious, but I don't see that very often, especially in horror films. So there's a lot of kind of subverting expectations in this particular film. And I would say, though the movie is grotesque at times, it is ultimately, as I said before, it's a coming-of-age story. It's not just gross for the sake of gross. It's about the kind of familial bond. It's about a sister bond. It's about becoming an adult. I say this all the time, but it's honestly something that I really believe, and I think that it fits perfectly along with this film. But the idea that great horror films are studying the human condition in a way that shows it in a greater context. So even though this film is a coming-of-age story, as I said, we see a million of those, but it focuses on the idea of human beings and the primality, the animalism, the idea that humans often are afraid of all of that, and we tend to hide behind our civility. And this film is kind of saying, no, that you should kind of take ownership and own a lot of that and be able to handle it in ways that can keep you in control, yet you never forget that that is who you are. And this is one of the best horror films I've seen in a long time. And let me tell you, that is saying something, because there have been quite a few great kind of art house horror films within the past several years. Last on my list, and this is my favorite movie of the year. This is a French film. It is called Dorama. It is written and directed by Bertrand Bonello. And this movie is, it's really hard for me to talk about. I feel like every time I try to tell somebody about it, I don't sell it very well, and they end up being less interested in it than they were before, and I apologize for that. This is a spectacular film, and the way that it approaches this particular subject matter of terrorism, which is kind of taboo at the moment, is absolutely brilliant. Just the way that the filmmaking itself, the way that it builds tension is both very much rooted in a lot of the filmmakers of the past, yet it feels like something I have never seen before. The way that Bonello plays with time, with the distortion of memory, the way that he tells the story from multiple points of view at certain points in the film. There's a lot of surrealist elements as well. It's very meticulous, very intricate. Every single shot and every moment is so beautifully choreographed. It's one of the only times, I don't think I've ever really said this before, I think it's one of the only times that a movie, a story, actually benefits from being skeletal. I'm always complaining about skeletal storytelling, and when I say that, I mean movies that don't give us enough information, that are too ambiguous, and yet here it totally works. We don't need to know the intricacies of the plot, and we don't need to focus on that. We don't need to focus on character motivations, because really there is none. You walk into this movie knowing very little about the characters, and you walk out knowing almost next to nothing as you leave. And I know that might sound kind of strange, but as I said, it works because this is a film that depicts it's really like a society of youths, like the younger generation that is coming up. And these younger people seem to be standing for something, and we aren't really sure what that is, why that they're doing what they do, why they are terrorists, and maybe they don't really know either. And even if they say they do, I don't think that they understand the actual meaning behind their actions. And this is a film that is very much in the same style of Stanley Kubrick. It has that distant feeling of examining the human experience as though we are like specimens in a lab, because this film also does not really have much of a moral center either, and maybe it doesn't need one. I feel like character development and all of that would cause us to sort of make assumptions about the characters and focus on the wrong thing. Here, what we really just need to do is focus on how these characters deal with the situations, how they deal with their actions, and they do it in the aftermath when they're hiding out in that mall. How they deal with it all through the filter of the modern age, which is really what that mall represents. It's consumerism. Things start to get really trippy in that mall, and there are a lot of existential questions as the film kind of opens up, and they're never on the surface. These are things that I kind of just figured out for myself, and obviously you can do the same. So yeah, I know that I'm often really all over the place when I talk about this movie, just because I don't know what to talk about or how to talk about it, because there's just so much for me that I admire about it. But just watch the film. It's finally on Netflix, which, oh my God, that made me so happy to see. And then just watch my review for it. I think I kind of was a little bit more coherent there. There's nothing like this film. I haven't seen any film that is that ambitious and be able to deliver on all of that ambition in the way that this film did. So for me, it is head and shoulders over almost everything else that I've seen. And it's original and just awesome. Anyway, those are my favorite films of 2017. Let me know what some of your favorite films were, or films that I need to see, because as I said before, I haven't seen everything. Anyway, yeah, that's the video. Thank you all for listening. All my social media information is below. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.